right.
All right, Germain, we're on. Thank you for joining. I really appreciate your time. How's it going? How are you?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Reza. I appreciate the invitation. I'm doing fine. Currently in Toronto. It's fairly cold these days, but we've had a reasonable winter so far, so we can't complain.
Yeah, 100%. Global warming is kind of taking its toll on the city. It is a warm winter for sure. Can't complain. Can you tell us, what it is that you do for those who don't know? I came across your profile on LinkedIn, and I thought that I could share, I learned from some of your experiences and insights, especially given this time, strange times that we're in.
Yeah, strange times for sure. I've basically been involved in the introduction of emerging technologies for several years, over 25 years, from the early days of e-commerce to cloud and now these days AI even. There's a lot of disruption in the workplace. There's disruption in society, obviously, because of the pandemic. And it's causing some challenges in the workplace, but it's also bringing some opportunities. And I think that's where we can have a good discussion around that.
Interesting. So, like you said, there has been a lot of disruption, right? And you've been in and out and about, the industry, looking at the new trends that come in and new cycles that happen. And this pandemic is one of them. So based on your experiences, what do you think is the best way or the patterns that you've seen organizations follow to navigate through these large disruptions?
Well, what's happening with the disruption these days is that, number one, in many cases, it's happening faster than people can adapt. And that's a main challenge, or it's happening in such a way that the organization can't adapt or can't take advantage of the benefits soon enough. So, for example, all of a sudden last year, most companies had to get used to having people work from home, work remotely. And that, to me, that wasn't new because I've worked from home for many, many years. But for a lot of people, it was new. And in addition to that, working from home because of the pandemic means that other people are at home, your kids, your spouse, whoever else, and you may not be set up properly. I have a home office. Not everybody has a home office. You're working with people who have to work from the couch or the dining room table. So there's a lot of challenges from that point of view, right? But at the same time, doing it that way means that all of a sudden you can include more people in the discussion. You can invite a colleague from somewhere else to join. You can have a quick discussion with a client that maybe you didn't have before. So there are both sides to look at. And the idea is that you have to be open enough to try them.
Yeah, 100%. So have you seen anyone not being able to, any businesses not being able to adapt to this new normal? Because as we move forward, it kind of looks like this is going to be what we're going to do for the rest of time. We're not really going to go back in offices anymore. How do you think this is going to affect certain businesses who were used to the old way?
Yeah, I would say it's amazing how well people have been able to adapt, at least in the short term anyway, to deal with it, because business continues. And, those of us who can work from home, business continues. And while there's been an impact, it's not as significant as you might think. The impact is certainly a lot more on those businesses. If I use, for example, hospitality industry, restaurants, hotels, that kind of thing, they just don't have the same amount of business, period. It's not something that offhand technology can help them directly, but indirectly, sure they can, because they can offer the services online, they can sell online. So that works. Even, takeout restaurants can have online ordering, which is not new, but it's just accelerated. There are still challenges in terms of if we work remotely going forward on a permanent basis, I don't believe that'll be the case, by the way. I think we'll have a hybrid kind of arrangement. Some people work from home, some people work from the office, in part because, as I said, not everybody's set up at home, but also you still need that human connection. So you still need to go and meet in person, right, as you did before. And that's the biggest difference between working from home before the pandemic, where I could still work from home, but go and visit my clients or my colleagues or my staff, several times a week as needed, as opposed to now, I can't go and meet anybody, neither can you. So we have this discussion now over Zoom or Teams or anything like that, but it would still be nice to meet face to face, shake hands, look each other in the eye if there are issues or whatever. So that's something that I think we will need, and we will still have some of that going forward.
100%. I see why you say that we're going to have a hybrid model. Now, my question is, when big companies like Microsoft, for example, start implementing a total work from home scenario and policy, isn't this going to affect and trickle down into other smaller or medium-sized organizations?
I think it will, definitely. But it doesn't mean that they will not have any office space. Right. So I suspect, and for example, last year I worked with Ceridian, cloud services provider. Even though the idea is that everybody works from home, there are still offices open where after the pandemic, people can still go and meet there, right? So I think Microsoft will do the same thing. All of the other companies, they will still have office space where they can go and meet as a group, because you need to do that. Smaller companies can be more nimble, and depending on how their workforce is set up, people in certain local areas can meet locally in an office, or in a, you can rent office space for an hour a day or whatever. That was in place before, so maybe more common. But there will still be, I think, a mix, and smaller companies can still take advantage of that as much as large ones, perhaps even more easily.
Interesting. And talking about these small, medium-sized companies, do you think this new pandemic has accelerated companies to move towards digital, or at least digitally transform themselves faster than they would have if the pandemic wasn't there?
Oh, absolutely. The pandemic has been the largest accelerator for large or small companies. It wasn't driven by business, by strategic goals, by long-term plans, by CEO's idea. It's just the pandemic overrode all of that, and it just accelerated everything because you have to, right? Largely, you have to. That's why there's a lot of technology out there that people can use to offer their businesses, their service, their product, and also for people like you and I to collaborate. Right?
Yeah, 100%. What's your experience with digital transformation? Have you also helped organizations, transform themselves?
Yeah, and so digital transformation now adds a whole new element, because in the process of adopting work from home, perhaps remote work, as you adopt the new technologies, you have to change your business processes. In some cases, you even change your business model or your internal organization, but you have to change your business processes to take advantage of the technology. So, for example, if you say we're going to automate a certain function, you have to look at every touch point, basically, and say, what's going to be automated, what will not be automated, and where's my weak link? So if there is a weak link, then you have to look at that. And I can tell you from my experience, the biggest challenge is not the technical adoption, because company will go in, implement software, or you do it yourself, or you use a cloud provider. The biggest challenge is to get the people to adopt it and adopt it and use it so that you get the benefits out of it. Right? So it becomes a change, a behavioral change project in addition to a technology implementation project.
Interesting. So it's really interesting that you mentioned that. I was reading Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, and he basically was studying companies who lasted throughout the years and they exceeded expectations and, you know, went over above and beyond, right? And one of the patterns that he saw was it's not necessarily drastic and radical technological shifts that cause companies to become great, but it's more in people adapting and being nimble and being open and flexible to these changes. So given the fact that this is one of the challenges, how do you think companies who've succeeded went about doing that?
Well, I think that the companies that succeed start with the implications of the people, start with the people in mind from the beginning, right? So I have this phrase that actually was coined by a former client of mine and a friend called modeling from the top. So if you're going to implement a major transformation, it's got to come from the top. So the executives of the company have to communicate their vision and have to indicate what's in it for me, for everybody in the organization. So it's not enough to say, we're going to roll out this new software and, you know, here somebody's going to tell you how to make it work and it's done, right? So what's in it for me in the sense that when you do a digital transformation or any other business transformation, the biggest issue is that fear, maybe people fear losing their job. And right now with the pandemic, people fear losing their job, right? So it's always a what's in it for me. And so if you start with looking at the people from the beginning, and I use this other expression, people first, right? I look at everything people first. So you need to look at a business transformation or digital transformation with two lenses. The business capability lens, so that's what you're going to do to your business, and then the human aspect. What's the behavioral change that you need? So you have to start working with the people from the beginning, understand their objections or potential objections, and you do stakeholder analysis, that's what it's called. And then basically work with everybody to discuss, identify the issues, discuss the implications, and then as you roll it out, people understand, accept it, and then they'll adopt it, and then you get the benefit. That's how it's done, basically.
Yeah, and you're right. To your point, you know, this is one of the fundamentals of change management. This is change management 101, right? And people know this theoretically, but then so many organizations fall into the pit of, you know, trying to fit in a certain technology and force people to adapt to it. Why do you think that's the case? And, you know, from your perspective, how do you think leaders can better educate themselves to kind of adapt this approach rather than the former?
Well, certainly if you try to force it, it doesn't work. And yeah, it's change management 101, but it's also change leadership in the sense that if they have a change management program, very often if the budget gets tight or time gets short, change management is one of the things that maybe gets dropped, right? So we don't have time to do that. Just go ahead and do it, as you're saying, right? But you still need that leadership capability, and again, it's the executives have to have that change leadership mentality to say, if I want this change to be effective, I have to make sure that it's implemented properly to everybody. So leaders need to educate themselves, not just on what problem the technology can solve for them, because obviously that's the whole idea. Otherwise, you're not going to do you any good. If you don't have benefit, you're not going to do it. But if you're going to implement new technology or change something, what is the problem you're solving and the benefit you're going after? And then what is really you need to do to get the benefit out of it? So you have to look at the change process again, the business side, the human side.
Right. And how much do you think company culture affects change management?
Oh, it's a huge, huge component. That's a great point. Culture is a great component. I forget who it is. I think it might have been Drucker. who said, culture eats strategy for breakfast, something like that. I can confirm that quote for you, but culture is the biggest aspect, I think, of a company's success. So as you were saying before, some companies succeed at doing things. It's not because necessarily they have the best product or the best service, but they would have the best people or the people with the best attitude, the best culture to make it work, right?
Right. And do you think culture is driven top down, or is it more bottom up?
Oh, it has to be driven top down.
Top
It
down.
has to be driven top down. Culture also starts from the top. If the people at the top are friendly, team-oriented, people-focused, of course they're outcome-focused also. I mean, that's why they're in business. That's what they get paid the big bucks for. But at the same time, they have to understand you need to get your people equipped. There's a term called servant leadership, which I really believe in, where you have to make sure that you have the right people with the right skills, the right tools, and then then you can trust and empower them to do what needs to be done, and it'll get done. But it has to come from the top, definitely. If on the other hand, the leadership is this old, let's say the old authoritarian style, command style, that doesn't work as well today, because you can't just say to people, this is what I want, do it, right? Just, it doesn't get done, or it doesn't get done the way that they would like it to.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. And, talking about culture, I was curious to get your insight on, we have company culture, we have organization culture for sure, but then there is a generational culture as well. And you might not be in touch with, Gen Z, but I wanted to get your insight on how you think, businesses are going to shift their operations or their approach or their culture with the changing of the generations.
Well, I think companies have to accommodate the different cultures. Can you update me? So who fits into Gen D? What's the age bracket for Gen D?
Gen Z, yeah. So Gen Z, they would be people born after 1996.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. That's fine. Yeah. So basically, I've worked with some of those people, because they're new grads now, right? So with new grads, the expectations are still pretty high, and I worked with new grads last year, and they were onboarded from home. They worked from home. All they had in some case was a room that they rented for university, but didn't have an opportunity to move into anything else. So I think that all of the companies have to look at all the generations and say, from the baby boomers who are 60 plus or 55 plus right now to the 22-year-olds, they all have to be able to work together. And they do need different things to a certain degree, but that's where the culture and the collaboration and the teamwork can make all the difference, right? And again, it's not to say, you guys make it work, work together, make it work. It's just not quite like that. You really have to have that right mindset in the company so that everybody is included, age, race, all of that stuff. Everybody should be included in that whole culture of teamwork.
100%. And I'm gonna kind of minimize the culture discussion here. I want to maximize some of the use cases that you've done, and I'm putting you on the spot right now a little bit. But I wanted to know some of the success stories that you've had in helping companies transform themselves, and kind of like a little summary or a business case about the opportunity that was there.
There've been a few. I can give an example, for example, of a financial services company where we were implementing a new product to help them with business processes. And one of the things that, so, you know, the normal step, you propose what, you understand what the client needs, you propose what they do, what you can do for them. And once the deal is signed and you have a project, you start working on it, you really have to then get a full understanding of what they need. So we started to work with this company, and after, you know, I don't know how long, maybe a month into it or something like that, the executive, we were having lunch, and the executive told me one time, you know, I'm really impressed that you guys are questioning how we do things, so that there are ways of doing certain things better and differently. So you're not just automating what's there, but you're introducing new ways of doing things, and then giving the advantages. So that was very successful. We had follow-up phases. I can't give you a name, but it's a financial services company. Yeah.
Of course, interesting. So they enjoyed how you questioned every single thing that went on as well.
Well, in a sense, yes. You say, well, why are you doing it that way?
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to say we've always done it that way is not the right answer, because the way you've always done it may not be the right way to do it today, right? So, and that's where you really get the benefits of the new technology, but that's also where you get the really benefits of the change, so that the people can also be more effective, and they work on things that will be more productive, that can't be automated.
Yeah, 100%. So in, you know, talking about these case studies now, I'm sure you've done a lot of these projects in the context of emerging technologies. We talked about how change management and people coming first are very important, right? And then we also talked about how culture needs to be driven top down. I wanted to know, in the context of digital transformation, what's the best way to deliver a solid strategy so that this transformation ends up being successful? Because I know you also, you know, work with creating strategies as well for organizations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the strategy has to reflect the business needs, strategy to execution. So basically, it has to reflect the business need, and then the outcome, and how you're going to get there, right? So it really has to look at the different stages of what you need to do to turn things around, basically, right, in order to get the right outcome. So I'm not sure if I'm really answering your point, but
no, yeah, I mean, you're answering it in a sense, but what I would be interested to know is, you know, building a strategy in order to implement a successful transformation initiative, right? Does that strategy need to align with, let's say, the company's vision, mission, and the products that they're building? Or does it also need to align with, let's say, the market that they're in? Does it need to align with the long-term strategies that they have? Things like that.
yeah, okay, sorry. Yeah, so it depends on what it is that you're actually introducing, right? So if you're introducing a new technology, then you certainly have to look at all of these implications. And very often it does touch a lot of the points in the organization. So it may touch a lot of the functions.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to really know which of those functions will be affected and who needs to be involved from the beginning, right? So the strategy has to include who are the stakeholders, what's their involvement, what's the implications there, what's the implications on your clients as well as on your people, because when you introduce something like that, there are implications on your client. The client experience may be different, right? Even though you may be offering the same service, the client experience may be different.
Interesting. Okay. Well, that sounds good. And I'm sure that the pandemic has also brought, like you said, a lot of companies accelerating towards digitally transforming themselves. And another, you know, issue that comes into play is collaboration through remote work. And one thing that I was curious to know is how organizations hire new people without actually introducing them to the core team. like our organization has that problem as well right now. We're bringing in a lot of people. Some of these new members I haven't even seen in person. So what do you think the impact of that is going to be in the future?
Well, I think recruiting has definitely taken on a whole new level, and actually started before the pandemic to do online interviews and whatnot. But now is the only way to do it, right? So you have to recruit, and there are all kinds of sophisticated tools now for recruiting. Applicant tracking systems and the use of AI, for example. When a candidate is identified and asked for an interview, in some cases it's a challenge for the candidate if they're not used to it. So if you're an experienced person, like if you went for an interview for a job somewhere, but you're already used to all of this stuff, so not really as big of an issue for you to do an interview online, right? Like we're doing right now. But for somebody who has never worked online, or somebody who's a new grad in the first job, an online interview is a real challenge, right? But you really, since we don't have much of a choice, at least with the pandemic right now, you really have to try and understand, how do I get to know this person without meeting them face to face, right? So again, you can establish some form of you can reflect your company's culture when you're hiring, and just like you as a candidate, you kind of reflect what kind of person you are, right? So you have to learn to do it remotely, because the only choice. Definitely it's preferable to meet in person. I'm a big advocate of that in some cases, but as I said, I worked remotely for years. I've interviewed and hired people remotely. I've been interviewed and hired remotely, virtually. It still works. It doesn't work as well for people who are not used to it, or people entering the workforce. That's a big challenge, and that still remains a challenge. So that's something for us to work on, I think.
Yeah. If it's a challenge, it just means that there are more room for opportunity and solutions, right, to make it better.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, Germain, we're around the 35-minute mark. If you have anything else that you want to share with us, I'd love to hear it. If not, really appreciate your time.
Yeah. I actually am very interested in knowing what you hear from other people that you talk to on these podcasts, and the people that you work with. What do you hear as being something that they feel is missing? Is there something that everybody says, wish we could do this, or wish we had that? Is there something that keeps coming up?
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the things that I've seen recurring a lot is, how are we going to maintain the culture of the organization, or the company culture, while everyone is away? Because the pandemic seems to have locked people in, and you've not seen your team members for a very long time. The only time that you see some of them is when you're in meetings and you're working together. But even then, that touch is not there, that human touch. And then, a lot of events and a lot of get-togethers that used to happen to bring people together, those are also being stopped, right? So the real question, to answer your question succinctly, is how can we maintain organization and company culture throughout this period?
Yeah, and that's really key, and I'm glad that you're bringing that up, because I kind of felt that too. But it's good if you hear that from other people and in your own company. Currently, it's a challenge, as I said, but it puts a lot of responsibility on remote leaders, right? So remote work leadership has become a real critical role now, which is different. If some managers or leaders can manage and lead people that they see in the office, can run meetings of people in the office. Those who have difficulty with that, it's not only difficult for the leader, but it's difficult for their team, because they're not getting as much out of it, obviously. So remote work leadership becomes a very critical skill for every leader, I think. And I have posted a few blogs on that on LinkedIn recently. And I was going to update it again because I received some good feedback on different people. One of them, for example, culture, wherever I worked for the past 25 years or so, I always tried to meet people for lunch regularly. So you're busy, you're working, but let's meet for lunch, chit chat. Then we have team dinners or an afternoon of team activity or something like that. Group get-togethers, quarterly group get-togethers. Can't do these things now, but we'll be able to do these again once the pandemic is under control. Even if companies continue to have people work remotely, you will still be able to have those activities to help retain that culture that you're talking about. You'll have to do those things, I think, and you really have to have very frequent touch points with your people, even if it's remote. If you talk to your people regularly, at least once a week, one-on-one, for example, you get to build a relationship, you get to understand them, create opportunities for them to work as a team. There are tools like Mural and Miro and different other tools, or you can have brainstorming activities as a team online. Mm-hmm. Those things will all help, I think, to build the teamwork, the camaraderie, and to maintain that culture. But that is a critical point, and I'd be interested in hearing more from you on that as you get information from various other people.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned Mural. That's interesting because we introduced that, to work collaboratively together as well. So that's definitely a good platform. And you touched on some very interesting points. I need to check out the blogs that you wrote about remote leadership because it's interesting to me as to how leaders can develop that muscle as well.
Yeah. I called it, I think I called it my reflections on remote work in 2020. Something like that. I can send it to you. And as I said, I'll update it. One of the things that I forgot, for example, to mention is security. So there's cybersecurity, of course, right? But all of a sudden, if people work from home and if your employees deal with very confidential customer information or confidential employee information, how do you ensure that there's physical security at home? Security of your data on your home network, cyber security across the networks, right? Those are all things that we need to look at differently now, where it wasn't an issue before, but it can be, right?
For sure, cybersecurity is one of the fields that I also feel like is very underrated right now and is not getting a lot of attention,
Yeah, and actually cybersecurity and risk are things that never get much attention until something happens, mm-hmm. Right? So it's like a thankless role in a way, because if you do your job really well, then nobody hears about it, right?
For sure. It's like being a pilot or working in the services industry,
Yeah. If you're a pilot and you fly the plane really well from one end to the other and every smooth landing and everything else, okay, there's no mention, it's fine. But, if you have a bumpy landing, and what the heck, what's going on?
Yeah. No one is going to say, wow, that was a very smooth landing. Like, yeah, that's part of his job. That's what he needs to do.
Exactly. Yeah. Anyway, anyway, thank you very much, Riz. I appreciate it.
Really appreciate your time
this morning.
It's been very insightful speaking with you. And I'm sure, we'll have future conversations as well. I have a lot of other questions that, I will send your way so we can schedule some other talk soon, but really appreciate this conversation. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks you very much. Have a great day.